do you think, Morgan? Is this political correctness gone too far?
Yeah. I mean, we have a tendency to do that anyway. I mean, you get politically correct. Stuff happens that you don't want to happen. I all of a sudden became an African. Political correctness, African American. I'm not African. An American. I'm not African. An American. I'm not African.
So Morgan Freeman is with us today, and I've read up, obviously, on things that you've said in the past about Dr. Martin Luther King, and you had said this: Dr. Martin Luther King is not a black hero; he is an American hero.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I think if you sort of categorize people, it tends to dilute their importance. Referring to Dr. Martin Luther King as a black hero, it lessens his stature. He's an American hero.
Okay, so you would ask the question, how could, an Afro-American, an enslaved person, produce offspring with a Native American, a population of people that were pretty much free overall in general? Well, anyway, as some of you may know or may not know, the Native Americans were the first preyed upon slaves in the USA. And when they were being preyed upon, the peak of that slave trade occurred between 1670 and 1717. It declined steeply after that, but lasted throughout the entire 18th century. But it declined more so steeply after 1730, specifically. Let's talk about that slave trade. Anyway, the state of South Carolina was most notorious for enslaving Native American peoples. And the first and foremost people that they targeted and pretty much caused to suffer severely from the slave trade. And archaeologists, have elaborated on, and also in several articles I've read, and also a really good book I'm going to recommend later concerning this trade, that the early Florida peoples suffered the most from this trade. And those people were the Appalachee, the Timucua, the Calusa, the Tequesta, the Jayaga, the Miami, and the Guale, who were in northeastern Florida, but also southeastern Georgia. These people, I'm going to be honest with you, by the time the Seminoles got down to Florida, Florida was pretty much swept clean, of these people. That's how badly they suffered from this slave trade. Well, anyway, and speaking of the Seminoles, the Seminoles actually were a group of Creeks, Muskogee peoples, and a few other smaller remnant tribes that banded together with some runaway Afro-Americans to flee Native American slave raids. And it was kind of like, ironic or contradictory, I would say. The Creeks were some of the principal people that were actually selling some of the early Florida people to the English in South Carolina. Well, anyway, apart from South Carolina being notorious for the Native American slave trade, Virginia had a reputation, and so did Louisiana. These states were also involved in that trade. Well, anyway, I spoke about how the Appalachee, the Timucua, the Calusa Tequesta, and the Miami and the Guale suffered severely from this trade. But I want to, before I continue on the other Native American ethnic groups that suffered from the trade, I want to stop right there and mention something concerning the early Florida peoples. According to archaeologists, the bulk of the early Florida peoples were immigrants from the Caribbean and South America. The Timucua from the Caribbean, the Calusa, and the other southerly groups that lived in Southwest Florida and Southeast Florida. Archaeologists believe that they were migrants from South America, and they believe this due to the linguistic studies and also cultural studies, looking at the way these people lived. They're pretty much very much so convinced that these people came from the Caribbean and South America. The Appalachee were believed to be a group of Siouan peoples with a Muskogean elite class, and the Creeks are Muskogean, one of the largest Native American tribes in the Southeast. And I'm going to say something about the Creeks, which is pretty interesting later. Well, anyway, yeah. So this is quite interesting because I've heard from a cousin of mine. She mentioned that on one of Henry Louis Gates' Finding Your Roots videos, the TV series on Finding Your Roots, that he brings up the fact that when Native American DNA is found in Afro-Americans, by surprise, it's often Native American DNA that's from Central America, the Caribbean, and South America. And if in fact, the early Florida peoples were most targeted by the Native American slave trade, it would be no surprise that this DNA shows up as South American or from the Caribbean, and also Central American to some extent too, because peoples from the Caribbean, Native American peoples from the Caribbean and the South America are closely related to Native American peoples of Central America. But also I'm going to bring up something concerning Central America. In reference to Central America, I also read in quite interesting article that the Guale were a compilation of Maya, Siboney, and the Siboney are from the Bahamas, and the Calusa peoples. And the Calusa peoples were originally from South America that lived in southwestern Florida. So that Mayan DNA could also be an explanation why Central American DNA shows up in Afro-Americans. And I'm going to say something more about that Mayan DNA later concerning some other Native American ethnic groups. Because guess what? My Native American DNA showed up as Mayan on a website that I uploaded it on, which specializes in analyzing East Asian and Native American DNA. Well, anyway, we're going to talk about that a little bit later. Anyway, as I mentioned before, the Appalachee, the Timucua, the Guale, the Tequesta, the Calusa, the Miami, the Jaga, all suffered severely from this Native American slave trade. And the proof in it also is the fact that a lot of Florida Native American pottery has been found on South Carolina coastal plantations, which is quite interesting. Anyway, other Native American groups that suffered from the slave trade were the Taensa, the Tunica, the Homa, the Bayagula, the Biloxi. Now these are peoples that existed in the lower Mississippi Valley area between Mississippi and Louisiana. Also the Choctaw, and even peoples around the Great Lakes region, which is quite interesting to me. The Kaskaskia, the Miami, the Kickapoo, the Peoria. These are Midwest people. Anyway, yeah, were victims of this trade also. Had a brain fart moment. Anyway, we're victims of this trade also. And what's quite interesting the entire like eastern part of the United States, the Native American ethnic groups in the eastern part of the United States were not like, I guess you would say, excluded in any bit whatsoever. There was, scholars are still doing research on this topic. They've estimated, the tens of thousands, possibly, and more of Native American ethnic groups that were possibly victims, that were actually not possibly, excuse me, that were victims of this trade, and also those that were possibly victims of this trade. That's what I meant to say. Yeah. Anyway, they've come up with some figures and numbers so far. Well, anyway, apart from the ethnic groups I mentioned beforehand, the Powhatan were victims of the trade, the Tuscarora, the Huron, Erie, the Susquehannock. And what's interesting about the Huron, the Erie, and the Susquehannock, the Iroquois, in as early as 1610 were being armed with guns by the Dutch, and the Iroquois were selling the Huron, Erie, the Susquehannock, and also the Shawnee as war captives, and ultimately slaves. Yeah. Well, anyway. Yeah, that's what's quite interesting. And when you begin to read about the Native American slave trade, a great book to check out is The Indian Slave Trade. It's the Rise of the English Empire in the American South, 1670 to 1717, by Alan Galley. It's awesome. It's very detailed, very thorough. Yes, it's amazing, an amazing book. It's quite popular. Well, anyway, yeah, but it appears as though that, like, upon European contact, between 1670, even earlier than 1670, to be honest, 1670 and 1717 was when the peak of the trade occurred. That the Eastern Native Americans and also the Midwestern Native Americans got caught up in somewhat of a rat race, an unusual, crazy rat race of trying to, like, access European goods at the expense of selling war captives, and they weren't just simply making war upon people, because they had some type of vendetta against them most often, but these Native Americans got in almost a type of what I call a crazed, like, frenzy of, like, purposely selling other Native American groups as slaves, and there were particular ethnic groups even more so guilty, such as the Creek and the Chickasaw and the Westo. And what's interesting, what happened with the Westo, what tripped me out with the Westo, these people came down from Virginia, settled in South Carolina, in the southern portion of South Carolina, and they were heavily armed by the English and sold tons of other Native Americans. But when a war occurred between them and Euro Americans, the Euro Americans, or just say plain old white Americans, sold the entire remnant of the tribe to the West Indies. The entire eastern half of the United States and a portion of the Midwestern half of the United States, it became like crazy. It became like a crazy rat race between 1670 and 1717 of Native Americans selling Native Americans. And now, Native Americans weren't only selling Native Americans. There were Europeans also targeting Native American groups. Don't get me wrong, they definitely also were. But but it became a crazy rat race. And what's quite interesting is that, like, a large portion of these people were sold to the West Indies. So a large portion of these people were sold to the West Indies. And I mentioned earlier that the peak of the trade occurred between 1670 and 1717. So if the peak of the trade occurred between 1670 and 1717 and declined steeply after that, and especially after 1730, you can imagine that like if an Afro-American has Native American ancestry, it would be kind of far back. It would be kind of far back, and the average Afro-American that has Native American ancestry probably can trace it back to an ancestor who lived throughout the 1700s, sometime through the 1700s, and you know, lesser in the early 1800s. Yeah, and also you have to consider the fact that more than half of these people were sold to the West Indies and also to New England. And New England had a much smaller Afro-American population than the Upper and the Deep South. The Upper and the Deep South were the locations where the Afro-American populations were most dense in particular. Anyway, yeah. But in reference to you know, evidence of Native Americans and Afro-Americans mixing, often in planter wills, you'll find like you know, distinctions between slaves that are they'll say Native American, not Native American, they'll say Indian. I'm, you know, thinking in my modern terms, I'm seeing Indian across my face, but Native American is coming out of my mouth. They'll have like Indian, they'll have like Negro, they'll have mulatto, which is half white, half Afro-American, and they'll have Mestiz. And Mestiz is half Afro-American and half Native American. And when indentured servants were the thing, they'll actually have white. Anyway, yeah, you'll see these in planters' wills. Apart from planters' wills, you'll also see ads. Ads of slaves that were Mestiz. It's spelled M-E-S-T-E-E, and also sometimes it's musty, and it's spelled M-U-S-T-E-E. You'll find ads. There were ads about like Native American runaways, and also Native American. Apart from Native American runaways, the Mestiz in Boston, in not Boston particularly, but I meant Massachusetts. Should look at my notes. Massachusetts, as late as 1750. Yeah. Well, anyway, also what's kind of interesting, going back on topic of the Central American and South American and you know, Caribbean DNA, Caribbean native DNA that has been found in Afro-Americans, you know, quite often. Was quite interesting. I've come across several articles that talk about like Mayan DNA being heavily found in the Creek peoples. The Creek peoples, what's interesting, the Creek peoples were highly involved in selling other Native American groups, but at the decline of the Native American slave trade, the Creek, the Chickasaw, and the Cherokee, I hope I didn't forget earlier while I'm mentioning it now, the Chickasaw and the Cherokee were also people that were guilty of selling other Native American groups, including the Yamasee. The Yamasee were guilty of it also. But interestingly, the Creek, the Chickasaw, the Cherokee, and the Yamasee, all these peoples who were targeting other Native American groups, selling them, you know, as slaves, they ended up being sold as slaves themselves. The Euro-Americans, the whites, just turned on them, and that's what's kind of interesting, kind of funny. It kind of reminds me of the dynamic that occurred in West Africa, West Central Africa, and Southern Africa during the transatlantic slave trade. I mean, the conquered were at once the conquerors, and oftentimes I can imagine like you know, amidst slaves in the American South, people were looking at each other kind of funny, working alongside each other, because oftentimes the conquerors in West Africa, West Central Africa, Southern Africa became the conquered. Do you understand where I'm coming from? And the same thing happened with the Native Americans. And yeah, but On the note of the Central American, Mayan, and also the South American and the Caribbean DNA that has been found in Afro-Americans, Mayan DNA has been found a lot in the Creeks. It's been found in some subgroups of the Cherokees, and also DNA has not been found among the Guale, but culturally, and linguistically, archaeologists believe the Guale have Mayan DNA in them also, along with Siboney and also Calusa, and if it's Calusa, it's South American, of course. And yeah, for the Native American ethnic groups, that DNA studies have not been done on. There is, so far as the early Florida, there is belief that these people came from the Caribbean, as I mentioned earlier, and South America, because of linguistic and cultural comparisons anthropologists have made. Anyway, but in reference to the Cherokee particularly, there are certain subgroups, particularly in North Carolina and also Georgia, Mayan, and also South American DNA, did not mention that earlier, has been found among. Yes, but not all of the Cherokee subgroups, but the Creeks even more so widely in particular. Well, anyway, with myself was quite interesting. I uploaded my raw DNA data to DNA Land from Ancestry DNA. Ancestry DNA is where I received my ethnicity estimates from ultimately. I uploaded my raw DNA data to Ancestry DNA and DNA Land. I have so much flowing in me right now. I'm trying to filter it all out. Please excuse me. Please be forgiving. Anyway, like yeah, when I uploaded my raw DNA data from Ancestry DNA to DNA Land, quite interestingly, it showed up as Amazonian. And I'm like, wow, Amazonian. And I kind of looked it up, and to see what Amazonian represented. And it was these tribes in Brazil, Bolivia, and Uruguay. These were like the sample reference panel population DNA Land used. I'm like, wow, I said, quite interesting. And someone told me about WeGene, that WeGene actually specialized in Native American and East Asian DNA. I said, maybe they can become a little bit more precise. But when I showed up Amazonian, I knew particularly that my Native American ancestors came from the southeastern part of the United States. Seeing that South American DNA showed up in some of the early Florida peoples, and also some of the Cherokee and possibly some other groups. Yeah, I knew like it was somewhere in the southeastern part of the United States, opposed to the upper South or New England, where a decent amount of Native Americans were sold. But anyway, yeah, I knew it was from the southeastern United States, part of the United States. And when I found out about WeGene, I got really happy. They said they have 3 categories. I'm like, okay, 3. Okay, let's see what it comes up within these 3 categories. WeGene has Mayan, it has Inuit, and Native American. And as I mentioned before, WeGene specializes in East Asian and Native American DNA. They're horrible for anything else. European, African, I don't want to go on a tangent about that. But yeah, but they specialize in East Asian and Native American DNA. And I speculated what my Native American DNA would show up as. If it showed up as in the category of the generic Native American, I knew it was more than likely some type of Native American DNA, possibly from the upper South, maybe from the Midwest or far stretch New England or something. But or even the Southeast still. Yeah, even the Southeast still, because the Southeastern Native Americans were not completely of Central American and Caribbean and South American native stock. Anyway, like I had an inclination what was going to show up, so it showed up Mayan. I'm like, wow, that's really revelatory. That's really revelatory. So I know my Native American ancestors came from somewhere in the deep South. Possibly among the Guale, among the Creek, maybe a subgroup of the Cherokee. Anyway, and I also know that my Native American ancestors ultimately came from the Yucatan Peninsula and Mexico, or El Salvador, Belize, Guatemala, Honduras. migrated, to the southeastern part of the United States and mixed with Native American peoples that were already there. I know that part at least. But it was wonderful to find out that I have Mayan ancestry. And I don't know, it created a storyline in my mind. I said, dang. I said, like, wow, some of my ancestors, for very particular reasons, traveled by boat from the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico to the USA, or from Belize, El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala. Yeah, well, anyway, it created a quite interesting, awesome, colorful narrative in my head. Anyway, also, I want to address something that showed up in my comment section, that Native Americans, prior admixture with Afro-Americans, had possible Negroid DNA inside of them. That is false. That is just totally false. I try to be in no way an ethnocentrist and not an Afrocentrist, and I despise equally Eurocentrists. Anyway, but yeah, there has been Australoid DNA that has showed up among Native American groups in Oaxaca, Mexico, and also certain parts of South America. And Australoid DNA, were revealing to archaeologists that there were Native Americans who mixed with Melanesians who actually traveled from Oceania on boat. There's a small percentage of Melanesian DNA in some of the Native American peoples in South America and also Mexico and possibly Central America if it's in Mexico. You know what I mean? There are small percentages of Melanesian DNA found in these people. Melanesians are not the equivalent to Negroids. Melanesians are Australoids. Anyway, also I wanted to mention, as for those Afro-Americans who could possibly make comments, I heard comments like this on my previous video. That's why I'm addressing it. As for those Afro-Americans who want to make comments about the way Afro-Americans mixed with Native Americans for the most part was through the free people of color population. No way, not so. The Native American groups that mixed with the free people of color populations were a small remnant Algonquian and Siouan tribes who had already been decimated because of war and disease, and also being partly sold into slavery. And the free people of color population, they represent a smaller percentage of the Afro-American population. And most of these people weren't actually Afro-American in the true essence. Because many of these people were mixed breeds, like from mulatto families.
I'm talking for the natives.
Yeah.
I like when it comes to talking about African Americans, I have no education with that. Period. I don't. I'm not even connecting to that no more, because that's a system. That's like connecting. Say, hey, he's a bad guy. You don't hang with him. Oh, hey, I'm gonna find out for myself. I'm not African American at all. My folks is not from Africa, and a lot of people in this room, folks ain't from Africa. Might be a couple, but people just don't understand. I asked my grandma, like, yo, grandma, what's your background? She like, Redfoot and Blacktail Indian. What? Yeah, my mother and my father did. We 100% Indians. That's my other grandma. We got Cherokee in us, and European and Italian, a little Dominican. It's crazy. I'm like, what the fuck? That's why I'm African. Y'all look at me funny, like, nigga, I'm African. Like, you're not though. Like, you're not. 80% of slaves was already here. It was natives. It's crazy.
80. Where you get that number from?
Shit, I just checked the books.
Which book?
Yeah.
I got a whole laptop full of this shit.
Yeah?
Yeah, just for me reading. It's not a solid book like, hey, there's only 1,000 slaves came here. And nah, nigga, you got to read. You have to literally read. Like, I'm so deep into it, I don't think about a slave ship. I think about, what was a slave ship called? Jesus. What the fuck was a slave ship called that Christopher Columbus was on? Who funded that slave ship? Who paid for that boat? Like, what was these folks' race? Like, what was their background?
Mike, you want to continue?
So, Walker, that's interesting.
Why? It's like a why. It's not like I'm chastising. It's like why.
No, but it's interesting because when it comes to you're addressing identity, right?
So you're familiar with that boat, right?
I'm not familiar with the boat exactly that you're referencing, but I am.
The slave boat, the first slave boat.
Oh yeah, the slave boat. Yeah, for sure.
So who paid for the slave boat?
That was from the Europeans in terms of
what was their
colonization.
ethnicity? What was their ethnicity?
There was Germans. There was individuals.
What was their ethnicity that paid for that boat? That built that boat and that voiced that boat and
who are the people who built the boat or who paid for the boat to be built?
It's in the books. It's just it's in the books. I'm not going to say shit because
we got to specify which boat.
Yeah,
and from which part of the country.
Columbus was on. The boat that y'all celebrated Columbus Day.
It's called Jesus of Lubeck.
Yeah, and who the Spanish
King Henry.
But we gonna get to it. Don't worry, we gonna get to it like that. Like, trust me, it's deep. It's deep, bro.
But the question I have for you in regards to identity, then, some blacks don't want to be called African Americans. Some refer to call as black. So with you saying you're not African American, you're more of the indigenous, your grandmother and your grandparents from the Native American tribes. Do you address yourself as Native American? Do you address yourself as black? Do you address yourself as African American?
I'm other.
So you're other.
I'm uneducated. I'm uneducated. So for me to sit here like a college professor or professor, I'm wrong. I'm uneducated. I'm confused. You know what I'm saying? But I'm damn sure not black. You're not gonna call me black. My grandmother's not Crayola. Like,
so
no,
then,
I'm connected to a tribe. I'm from a tribe, not a country. It's a big difference. Different laws, different everything. Like, big difference.